get started. We have things to accomplish. Good afternoon. Welcome to our July 20th, 2020 Return to School Steering Committee meeting. The superintendent is returning from vacation today, so I will be hosting the meeting. And when I get stuck or need help, Angela has agreed to kindly step in and answer any questions that I'm unable to. I'd like to take a moment and I will introduce myself and then go around and introduce yourselves and the role that you are playing in the Return to School Steering Committee. My name is Becky Fless. I'm the co-chair of this committee, and I am the chair of the school board. And I guess I should call on you because you won't know the order. So Terry McGuire, she's just waving. Molly Rogers. Molly is well, go ahead. You can introduce yourself.
I'm a parent from West Gardner.
Thank you. Alicia Morris.
Hi, I'm Alicia Morris, Director of Special Services.
Katie Gould.
Hi, I'm the principal at Helen Thompson School and am co-chairing the Communications Committee along with Josh Farr, our Director of Adult Education.
Jared Dumas.
Good afternoon. My name is Jared Dumas. I'm one of the two assistant principals at Gardner Area High School, and I'm serving as a co-chair of the Food Service Committee.
Thank you. Veronica Babcock.
I'm Veronica Babcock. I serve on the school board, and I'm the vice chair of the school board.
Mary Whitten.
Hi, I'm Mary Whitten. I'm the high school science department chair and a teacher sitting on the committee.
Thank you. Mary, your audio was very gravelly, just an FYI. I don't know if
Yeah, I'm in the car, so until I get home, it will be bad.
Okay, we'll try not to need you until you get home. Patsy Adams.
Hi, I'm Patsy Adams. I teach 5th grade at Pittston Randolph Consolidated School, and I'm an elementary committee member.
Thank you. Karen Moody.
Hi, I'm Karen Moody. I'm the building principal of Laura Richards School in Gardner, and I am co-chairing the resource committee with Sarah Boldick-Ignaziak.
Great. Angela Hardy.
Hi, I'm the Director of Curriculum, and I am chairing the Core Instruction, Social Emotional Learning, Technology Committee.
Great. Thank you all so much. And I received a text message from Gabe just a few moments ago that he will be a little bit late, so he'll be joining us eventually. So next we'll move on to the update from committees, instruction, SEL, and technology. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Angela. We need someone to take notes. That cannot be me. Veronica, how bad was it last time?
I can do it, but they will not be posted for like 2 or 3 days because I start summer school tomorrow, and I just won't have time. So if I don't mind doing them, they're not going to be up for the public for a couple days.
Angela, how does that work for us? Does it need to be up right away or?
I'm not sure. Let's first see if there's any other takers.
Okay, is there anyone who would love to take notes?
And it's not verbatim, it's, the general outcomes of each of our discussion points.
The big concepts.
Yeah.
Would you want them taken in the agenda directly?
Yeah, underneath there's a box that says meeting.
Note?
Yeah.
I'll take a crack at it.
Thanks, Jared. And really just a summary.
Sure thing.
Does it need, yeah.
We'll have the link to the video. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Veronica. I just know that's a lot of pressure on you when you have that deadline.
I had forgotten, right? I'd forgotten you were starting tomorrow. So thank you for speaking up, and thank you, Jared, for doing it. Okay. So now we have a note taker. So let's hear about instruction, social emotional learning, and technology, the learning platform recommendation, and seeking approval.
Great. So the committee has been meeting weekly, and we are in 3 committees: the remote learning committee, the in-person or in-school subcommittee, and the hybrid or blended learning approach. Those 3 subcommittees are meeting extensively and repeatedly in a week. And we are hoping that we will have some um, skeletal draft for people to weigh in on during next week's meeting, so that then we can move towards a refinement stage for the beginning of August. And this would give some guidance to some of the other committees trying to work their way through what are the implications based on the scheduling parameters that will result from the 3 different learning models. We are hopeful, because we received guidance from the Maine Department of Education last Friday, that we might be able to continue to accelerate our work and try to at least get a skeletal draft out to this committee for review next Monday. It's a big lift, but we will do our best to try to reach that goal. In the meantime, what we would like to bring forward today is we have reviewed all of the data from the student, staff, and family feedback about the remote learning experience this spring, and it became very clear to us that if we have to go into a remote or a solely online environment, or have to teach where some of it is remote, that a common platform is really encouraged. The challenge that we found in reviewing our options is that some platforms are better for some age groups and some are better for other age groups. And finding one that's common and easily accessible for pre-K to 12 is, we believe, a challenge. So we're actually putting forth a request for 2 platforms, and we would do some work as a committee and with the communications committee to develop some tutorials for our families and students on how to use those platforms efficiently and effectively, some of the tips and tricks as well, so that your email inbox doesn't get flooded with unnecessary information is like one tip. Um, that strategy of providing proactive videos or how-to tutorials is not something that we were able to accomplish last spring. So we're hoping that by taking into account the feedback from our families and students, understanding the different developmental stages that our learners are at, and um, and developing these little short tutorials that can be accessible online, that we have a way to move forward that might meet the needs that we foresee. So we propose that in pre-K to grade 3, that we use a platform called Seesaw. So it's set up, it runs like a Facebook feed in some ways. So some of the features are similar, but it's designed specifically for learning. One of the things families really liked in those grade levels is when teachers used other platforms that allowed for that kind of instant access on a parent's phone about some notifications or a two-way communication strand. Seesaw allows for that. And so we would streamline all of our communication into this one pre-K to 3 platform. So like a one-stop shop. So there's ways for private communication, and there's ways for pushing out information, and there's ways for students to actually share their learning results with their teacher and create a little learning portfolio. Um, so and we will work with our staff to make sure that that site is managed in such a way that it doesn't, our goal is to not put too much on the feed so that families don't have to scroll forever to look for things. That's something we've learned from other districts.
Right.
So we believe it has the right kind of bells and whistles based on the feedback that we saw. We've had some staff take a look at it, and they have reacted very positively to the opportunity. And we think that's a really valuable piece of data as well. And we have some users in the district that are quite skilled at it, as well as opportunities for training. So that is, and it's a reasonable cost. So we would like to present pre-K to 3 with Seesaw and grades 4 through 12 with Google Classroom. And knowing that we've done some training this June, knowing we'll do some additional training this August, and knowing that we'll create some tutorials for families to make it a much more successful experience if any family had trouble with it, which, given the conditions we were under, that it was easy enough for that to happen. And then for the live video feeds that would happen, that would all be through Google Meets, pre-K to 12. So if there was a live meeting that was to happen, that would run through Google Meets. In order to do that, we would move forward with, I think it's called Google Enterprise, right, Terry? And so it basically elevates our Google Suites for Education license, so that there are some additional features on the security side of things, and some features that Google has been working through to allow for greater management of a Meet site to meet some of the needs that teachers said they had, and some of the parents said they wanted to see a teacher be able to kind of manage their classroom in certain ways, and it looks like Google Meets is slowly working to allow for those features to go live. So we feel confident as a team, we feel confident in our recommendation of Seesaw, Google Classroom, which is what we already have, but elevating it to the Google Enterprise model. The costs are, I forgot. 0, Terry says. No, they're not 0. They're very small amounts, and they're sitting on a spreadsheet that the resource committee has access to. And the key there is the costs are sustainable. So we can sustain these costs in future budgets. Whereas some folks had asked for Zoom, and the cost of Zoom in our original quote would be $18,000. And in a follow-up quote, it would be slightly less than that, but it's something that we couldn't afford year over year. And so there was 2 difficulties with that. We would be training our staff and using a new platform, and training our students and training our families. And then on top of that, the following school year, when we couldn't afford that in our regular budget, we'd be training them back to Google. And so we felt like that transition wasn't really realistic. Whereas with the new features coming out of Google and with the reasonable costs for Seesaw, we felt like we could really sustain that in the long run in case we need to.
Angela, I have those numbers. Do you want me to let you know what they are?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So Seesaw for pre-K to 2 only would be $1,991. These are from the spreadsheet. Pre-K to 3 was $2,860. And the Google Enterprise model is $8,616.
So for $10,000 approximately, we could have a really solid and consistent across the whole district plan, in something that the lift for training won't be as significant, and we can continue to refine our skills and be more proactive with our families. And then the Seesaw feature would definitely support families that liked certain features out of like Dojo or Remind or some of those other apps that people have had that we don't feel like have the right security features we need for our district, but Seesaw has that. There are some other people on the committee. If there's something I missed, please feel forward. But otherwise, I'd like to know whether or not you're comfortable with this approach, so that we can continue to refine the actual kind of physical structure of the learning.
I know that for the board, where the board is concerned, that that the students, of course, come first, but that it's sustainable will be very appealing and really important for budgetary purposes. So I think this is really a great solution. So thank you for that. Others?
I just have a quick question. Will you be having special ed teachers trained in both in case they like switch between grades or their grade span crosses over?
Yes, we would probably need to do that, with the exception of the pre-K to 2 building. I think it could be a choice for them. Most of our training has been and probably will be in August virtual. So it's about managing time to access the trainings. Karen?
So because it's something that's sustainable over time, are we looking not to use CARES Act money to purchase these online?
We would probably like to access CARES Act money for this year, because we didn't budget this in for this year. But when Terry and I both looked at my budget and her budget, we felt like this is a cost we could take into account for the following year into our budget lines.
Great question, Karen. Thank you. Very clear.
We will have some additional requests going to the resource committee, and dependent upon our learning models that take shape around some hardware requests that we aren't bringing forward today because that hasn't finalized yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in full support of both based on the experience that I had or that I heard about from this spring from teachers using Seesaw and of course Google, which was our predominant platform. So I'm in full support of purchasing both and using both.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Jared, for the thumbs up.
I used Seesaw in my classroom. I have in the past, and I think it's a great platform. I really think that will work well. So I'm definitely in support of that.
Thank you, Patsy. Molly and then Karen.
I had exposure to actually both the Dojo program that you mentioned and the Seesaw because I had a child in kindergarten and in second. And so I actually did far prefer the Seesaw program over the other that I had experience with. So I'm happy with the decisions you're making here.
Oh, phew, that's great. Thanks, Molly, for that perspective.
Karen?
And I was just going to say the same thing. The teachers that have been using both Dojo and Seesaw, a lot have moved out of Dojo looking into Seesaw more. And I've been getting some emails from some of my teachers asking if that's something we can look into. So I think they're going to be really happy to find out that we're doing that. So I'm all for it.
And we are bringing this forward now because we recognize that to secure these licenses, we need to get that sooner so that then that information can be loaded into our system properly by the tech department, and then we can be prepared for the proper training with our staff. If we wait much longer, we won't be in a position to do that effectively.
Is the licensure pretty instantaneous? Once you pay the money, the license is available?
Yeah, but there's some work that the tech department has to do, which is that's the part that makes it a little bit more significant.
Yes. Okay. All right. That's great.
Right, Terry? Yes, she's nodding her head.
Yeah. Which is outside of our wheelhouse, but good to know.
Great. It seems like there isn't a whole lot further discussion. I appreciate the support. I know the members of the committee will appreciate that. We'll continue to work hard to see what we can accomplish between now and next Monday's meeting to bring forward some more some plans with greater detail. Great.
So the next step then would be the draft learning models for next week.
Yeah, and they'll probably not be as fully fleshed out as we'd like, but kind of a skeletal model to make sure that we're on the right track with the will of the committee, and then we'll get the details, the rest of the details fleshed out as much as possible. It's a tangled web. You start one area, and then all of a sudden you realize you're going down this rabbit hole of 25 other questions.
Yeah, everything adds an extra layer of something else. Yeah, interesting. Great, thank you. Are we ready to move on to communications? I'm excited about this one.
Well, I'm sorry I don't have the show and tell that I had hoped. At this point, communications, we're super action oriented with a lot of moving pieces and subcommittees working on projects. We're feeling a sense of urgency to get something posted because we know that questions are rolling in. But given the press conference on Friday with the governor and the commissioner and Dr. Shaw. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thought someone else spoke. We want to be sure that what we're communicating is accurate because once it's out, of course, the floodgates open and we want communication to be helpful and not to create any angst if we release information and then something changes. So video production has started. Like I said, I can't show you drafts today. I'm sorry, but they're in progress. Video production has started in the returning to school. Like we are working on the return to school. All of those moving pieces have started. The committee is seeking your support of the script. So what I'd like to do is share with you the very brief script. It will take less than a minute to make sure that you feel like it's informative enough to, what we're thinking is that we'll narrate over clips of things that are happening. So we have some committees that have shared pictures. We have some action happening in the buildings. For example, Gabe's committee, we took some footage of the committee walking around, doing one of the walkthroughs in the building. The committee is really feeling like it will be more powerful, especially for our older students, if they see our facilities and our people at work.
I would agree.
So the video is about 1.5 minutes in length. It's a series of brief pieces showing staff working and doing things. So the following narration will be spoken over the video. And we have 3 members of our committee who will be doing the speaking part. And here goes. Right now, more than 100 parents, teachers, administrators, and community members are working together to design a meaningful and authentic learning experience for all students. You may be wondering what school is going to look like this year. We are planning for choices and flexibility for engaging in learning. We are hoping to be in person. MSAD 11 educators understand that all students have differing needs according to their age and development. Return to school plans will outline how staff will address the needs of all students. So what can you do to prepare for school this year? Talk with your families. Understand that school will look different. School staff will continue to support students in whatever format learning takes place. On August 7th, the Commissioner of Education, Pender Macon, will provide guidance and recommendations for returning to school for the 2020-21 school year. Our plan will follow soon after. Visit our website for regular updates. So pretty general overview. The only thing that I wondered about was being so specific about August 7th. I'm not sure if that's changed given Friday's press conference. Open to thoughts and feedback, knowing that we really want to get this video posted as soon as possible. Jared?
Thank you, Katie. This will be really brief, and I think the work you're doing is fantastic. And the only reason I mention this here is because it came up today in our food service meeting, not related so much to food service as the overall messaging from the district. One of the things that we were talking about was the idea that we want to be back in our buildings, but we're all making contingency plans for if we're not. And we wondered if there was value in mentioning to families, have a backup plan for childcare or for your own return to work, because we don't yet know what's going to happen. And I know Diane Stevens mentioned a lot of people were having questions about what was going to happen, and other committee members mentioned that they had people who had absolutely no idea, friends and people living in the community had no idea that it was even a possibility that we might not be back in our buildings, that they just have already determined, mentally, they're obviously, we're going back. So they're not making any plans for what might happen if we don't. And I don't want to mess up the timing of your video getting it out there, but I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Well, I appreciate that very much, Jared. And we sort of split coming out of our meeting last Wednesday in thinking, let's have action happening in the video. We can get that going already, and then we'll just seek final approval for the narration over, so that we weren't stalling the whole process. I will give that feedback, and we will adjust the script. I think that's really important, and I think it also speaks to the fact that we've got families and students with information sort of all over the map, and the sooner we can just increase their awareness of all of the possibilities that we're becoming fluent in, the easier we hope it will be for everybody. Thank you. Other feedback?
Angela, did you have something?
I am concerned about the August 7th date, given that the Department of Education was so widely shared their updated guidelines. I anticipate I do anticipate there'll be further guidelines, but maybe I'm misreading the situation. I think what comes out at the end of the month will be what zone you're in. So I think most families who have read the updated framework probably believe that is the most we will get. I'm not clear as to whether that's true or not, whether they just accelerated their guidelines and that's what we're getting or not. So I worry about that, just that little bit of language, because if that's the guidelines, we're not going to be able to have something out to them at the end of the next week either. So I do wonder about maybe setting a target date for families and saying that we're following the guidelines provided by the Maine Department of Education's framework, keeping it short and sweet like you did, but giving us a little more wiggle room to get this design phase done.
That makes sense to me. Thanks, Angela.
Yeah, boy. Yeah. It escapes me, or I guess I was not thinking that families are just assuming that we will be going back to school. That's a little surprising to hear. So I do think it's really critical that we get information out, any and as many bites and bits of information as we possibly can to our community members and our parents, so that they have a clear understanding that we could be in any number of different stages heading forward, and it's not just a yes, it's not just a go. And I do think there's a lot of that we I think it's going to be by region, by county, and that those numbers and capabilities can shift depending on what happens as we do that. So I think it's very important to get that information out as soon as possible. So thank you, Katie, for that. Other comments, questions, thoughts?
Okay, I can take that feedback back to the committee, and they'll appreciate that. And like I said, our hope is as quickly as possible to get that finalized so that can be posted. Our nurses are in the process of creating a video. What they'd like to do is put 3 things together in one video instead of just wearing masks. They'd like to combine, some of the safety practices that we'll put in place, including masks, physical distancing, and hand washing. They're feeling pretty self-sufficient about putting that together, so we're offering support, and they are eager to do that. Our skeleton website is ready, and I wonder about a timeline for posting what you have for wishes for that to happen, because again, we can load it with resources. I think we want to be strategic about how useful that's going to be.
I wonder about the guidance that was put out by the DOE, and it has all those places that you can um, click the thing that was put, the item that was posted on Friday. And if you look through there, there's all the places that you can click down that have a ton of the guidelines in them. Would that be worthwhile to put on our website, on that website?
So I think there's no shortage of resources to put on there, and that it would be pretty straightforward to organize it in a way that makes sense. And there are many, many, many examples to look at. Until our plan aligned to red, yellow, green is ready to be posted. Is it the feelings of committee members that we post what we have for resources and then update it when we do have our plan? We are, by the way, working on that. And just for anybody online watching, that would be when we hear at the end of the month the recommendations around which regions or counties should return to school or be remote or a combination of both. It'll be determined by sort of a color-coded system, right? So we are working on a draft of what that could look like. We really liked Georgia's model. And so we're creating our own MSA D11. Of course, it's not coming from the state of Maine, but we're creating our own document that's organized the same way, but that is just relevant to our district. So any thoughts about that? I guess the bottom line question is, are you ready for a return to school website posted, or do we really want to wait until we're able to map out our entire plan or options within the plan? Karen?
I think it's time to start putting some communication out there, even if we don't have all the specifics. Parents, I was at Target the other day, and people are starting to buy back to school materials. And so, we just really need to start at least giving families an awareness that we may not be back in person, as much as I certainly hope we are. But I think just to kind of give them a heads up of, whoa, we could be remote again. And so, yeah, I think the more information that people have, the better to help them plan.
Karen?
My feeling is until we know what direction we're going in, I agree with Karen that it makes sense to promote the message that there are, I think it's comfortable to say there are three possibilities. And I think we should promote that idea that we may open in one of three different ways. But I think if you start listing a lot of information about what each one of them looks like, with specific details about what those plans look like before we know what we're doing, that's going to create a lot of confusion. So I think it's safe to say, please consider that there are three different possibilities: in person, remote, or a hybrid. But I think that's probably about as specific as any website ought to be until we know which direction we're going.
Others?
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Jared.
Yeah, and I think by having the site up and having some resources or available or links to guidance available, we're getting people in the habit of going to that site. And that's something that we do want to condition folks to do, because that can then be a site we can use all year. So not only just to promote the learning plans, but as things change throughout the course of the year, as we know they could, then people are comfortable and knowledgeable about where to go. They are not just waiting for information to come at them and fill their email inbox and be overwhelmed, but they can also be proactive and go directly to the site and feel a little bit more in control.
Karen?
I also think we should push out a message through ThrillShare to families, because they may not be going on our websites very much, and just giving them a heads up that we have a website that's being created, that is being updated as we get more information, and maybe send a text with a link for that website, possibly. I don't know if we can do that or not. I might have to go through like an email. But but just a thought.
I think that's a great idea. Anything that we can do that, I mean, we can't control much, right? But anything that we can do that helps our families feel as though they have a little bit of control over something that's coming rather than it just being a surprise. Any comfort we can bring, and I love the idea of training folks to just go to that website and click and figure out what it is they need to know. Yes, Jared.
Real quick, as it was mentioned about updating them, it's pretty simple function on website building now to have a place where people can sign up to get the latest updates. And if you could put something in like that where they could put their name, their email, and a phone number or something like that, that may be a useful way to start gathering some. I know we have Power School with, contacts and everything, but nothing wrong with building an email list, um, especially finding out how many people want updates or whatever. It's something to think about.
Currently, our website doesn't have that capability.
It's a good thought, Jared.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
One thing that we can do to build off Jared's thought, though, is as we're preparing for, as school leaders are preparing for the start of the school and trying to figure out how we're going to run through our, the whole paperwork and agreements and all that kind of stuff. What is our best methodology for doing that? We're always asking families to update their Power School information, right? Their contact information. Creating some time either for the communications committee or for school leaders to be thinking through in what way can we all consistently kind of elevate that contact information, and that it's helpful for communications. If they want to know what's going on in the school, if we have their email, they're going to get the Thrill Shield posts, they're going to get the email updates, and if we don't have it, then they don't get it. And so sometimes it's unclear what the purpose of the data is that we're collecting. Some of that data is required as just being a public entity, but some of it is really just to ensure that we are effective communicators with our families. So that just might be something that we, when we're asking for that, there's a little blurb about why it's so important to make sure that information is up to date.
I couldn't agree more. And honestly, communication is the thing that we talk about in work sessions for the board, with the board so much, because communication is the hardest thing to do effectively. It's not sending more paper home. It's how do you really engage and connect with the community. So I really agree that everything we can do that promotes great communication, excellent communication, even post COVID-19, is time and resources well spent. The board will be very happy about that. I think it's good for us to do. Okay. So athletics is next on our agenda.
Yeah. So week we discussed, we talked a lot about what's been going on with the summer workouts. Right now we have the gym at the high school divided in two for basketball workouts and volleyball workouts with 10 people on each side of the gym. The good thing about it is there's a bathroom on each side of the gym, so kids don't have to commingle. And right now the football team is the only one using the weight room. However, they have been bringing the weights outside, and in each use they're disinfecting the weights and making sure they're using those protocols. Today is the first day of phase 2. Which I can go down through the different aspects of phase 2 if you'd like.
Sure.
So phase 2, coaches should continue to track attendance like they've been doing already. Students and adults that have symptoms of COVID-19 illness or feel sick should stay home. Students and adults who have symptoms after arriving in training, they must leave immediately. The use of outdoor and indoor weight rooms, gyms, wrestling rooms, facilities is allowed, and of course in groups of pods of 10 or less, but up to 50 People are able to be designated for the outdoor areas. Students have to stay in their pods, their training pods, so that we can keep track of, keep that tracking up. All participants and adults should remain in proper social distancing. When they're in the weight room, they should be wearing masks based on the guidance. Clothes or disposable face coverings should be worn throughout each phase when not engaging in physical rigorous activity, like sitting on benches. They're keeping socially distanced. Medical grade face coverings aren't necessary. The cloth disposable face should not be worn when they're doing high intensity aerobics. Plastic shield coverings need to cover the entire face or attached to helmets. Activities are limited to conditioning, strength, and agility, and individual skill development. Limit of 2 hours of activity per student per day. Students should bring their own water bottles and not be sharing them. Disinfectant and hand sanitizers should be available on site, and they are everywhere. Students and adults should practice frequent hand washing when in contact with others. And of course, any of the equipment needs to be sanitized as well. And so in the gym, we're keeping groups of 10, and the gym's divided by 2, and then 10. So this week, Tuesday, is our next meeting, and we'll be discussing or trying to look at plans for not just the summer work, but what if we are having fall athletics and winter athletics. And I think the biggest concern with most of us is the winter athletics, because they're held inside gymnasiums, and how that would look. And do you allow one? So that'll be part of this week's discussion.
Thank you, John.
Yep.
All good questions.
Well, and that's my biggest concern is, do we really need an audience to watch the game? So do we just let the kids play and take out that one challenged area right there?
Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that the MPA will have some more suggested guidelines. We have a Wednesday morning meeting that I'm connected to through Maine School Board Association. So I'm guessing that there will be more conversation from the MPA about that.
And I know we'll be playing in regional groups, Richmond, Winthrop, the local area, so that will help.
Right. Great. Questions or comments from others for John? Yes, Patsy.
So I'm just wondering, when you talk about social distancing, like in the weight rooms or in the gym, are you talking 3 or 6 feet? And I'm just trying to gather some information for myself on that. I'm just curious.
Well, last week I don't think 3 feet came up until this week. I think last week we were talking 6 feet.
And I don't know that we're clear yet if around the 3 or 6 feet. I know that 3 feet is more convenient, and certainly more conducive, but I don't know if there's a CDC recommendation that really fits that. Angela, would you have any different information?
So in the Maine Department of Ed, I don't know how it works in athletics, John, but in the Maine Department of Ed framework, they did document some guidance on 3 feet versus 6 feet. I copied it into this agenda. I keep going to the wrong link. Sorry, I have too many tabs between watching you folks and looking at the tabs. Under number 4, you'll see for physical distancing 4B. Adults must maintain 6 feet of distance from others to the extent possible. Maintaining 3 feet of distance is acceptable between and among students when combined with the other measures outlined in this list of safety requirements. 6 feet of physical distancing is required for students while eating breakfast and lunch, as students will be unable to wear masks at that time. So it doesn't specifically go into physical education or athletics here because I do believe some of that falls under the Maine Principals Association.
Mhm.
And I did try to dig around to see if anything was indicated for like physical education classes because I would imagine we would need to be following a 6 feet a distance because that's considered movement.
Right.
And so that's where I think it would apply.
Right. In the 3 feet, I was under the understanding that you had a mask on when you had that 3 feet distance.
So we would just need to be really clear about that. If it is 3 feet, then the mask is on. If it's 6 feet, then the mask requirement would be different. Just need to be really, really clear about that.
Yeah.
Mary?
Yeah, so I'm home now, obviously. So as we think about that too, not only do we need to think about physical education classes, but we need to think about our hands-on classes like science labs, because there's no way if we're doing science labs that we can keep kids 3 or 6 feet apart. So we have to process that piece too.
Yeah, I did look, Mary, to see if there was further guidelines on that from the state, and there are not yet. I started looking in other areas, and I have a whole lot of links to read through. If you find some before me, that would be great to for us to discuss in our core instruction committee. Feel free to forward them along.
Okay.
Angela, it might be good to talk to the colleges too. I know SMCC will be having their students who are part of programs with lab work coming to school. So they must be doing the 3 feet with masks or maybe just masks. So that might be someone else to reach out to. Also, it might be different though because they're not public education.
Maybe it's different, but maybe it's not. So that's a helpful resource for consideration for sure. Thanks, Veronica.
I know that KVCC in their biology program, because I saw an email recently, is going to do a portion of their laboratory work online. So I can reach out to the science department chair there.
That's great. So many things to consider.
So in terms of athletics, though, you're following the MPA guidelines at the moment, and we're in good shape. You didn't have any questions you needed to raise with the committee? John?
No.
And everyone else is okay with the responses?
Great, thank you. We'll move along then. Food service.
So Linda and I, Linda Sargent, who is the Director of Nutrition Services, she and I co-chaired the Food Service Committee. We met earlier today. We've had an ongoing conversation about what the fall looks like. And as I mentioned last week, we're focusing on 3 scenarios: in-person, remote, or the hybrid. And we've really looked at elementary and middle and high school because we think that they're going to, food service is going to look different at the different levels. So what I can tell you is I feel really good about where we are as a committee. And I say that knowing that we've settled on very little and haven't made any firm plans. And the reason I say that is because we recognize that so much of what we're going to be doing as a food service community is going to depend on what direction we go in as a district and what the building managers decide they want to do in each of their buildings. We have recommendations, and we've heard the voices of everybody on our committee, which includes parents, teachers, administrators, kitchen workers, bus drivers. And we definitely have some frameworks in place. For example, we feel fairly strongly that we're going to recommend at the elementary level that we try to feed the kids in their classrooms. We're going to be looking at, maybe using classrooms to give more space at the middle level. And we're pretty certain the high school is going to be trying to make use of the cafeteria and maybe using more lunches, a greater number of the lunch of, maybe 3 or 4 lunch periods instead of 2 to try and spread people out. We definitely have talked about it, the importance of continuing to create a pickup model if we're in a hybrid situation where, if we have kids both in the building and out of the building on any given day, that parents are going to need to come pick up the food. That's going to be important so that kitchen staff can prepare enough food for both the kids in the building and the kids out of the building, as well as recognizing that our bus drivers are going to be picking kids up and dropping them off, probably making more runs than normal, and to try and get them to also deliver meals in that situation may not work. But if we were fully remote, that may be possible. We've laid everything out. We've talked about it. The costs that we believe can be incurred will be related to the packaging of food in a situation where we are hybrid. Linda believes her staff would most likely prepare a hot meal and then package a portion of it to be picked up for parents. So that would be a cost. Also, if staff hours need to be expanded, that would be a cost. The PPE would be a cost. And I know for Karen's committee, that's a big part of what we're supposed to be doing is laying that out. We just quite haven't gotten there yet, but the commitment that we made is that Linda and I are going to continue to work on that piece, and we're going to be available for this committee and any committees who have questions about what our plans are, but that we're really going to kind of, as a subcommittee, take a pause until we get more guidance from both the DOE in the forms of the color system where we're going to be, and from this steering committee and the group as a whole about what the fall looks like. What we did today is we agreed as a group that we would hold off on scheduling more meetings since we've talked about all three scenarios until such time as we feel like we need to come back together as a group to make more firm plans, or until anyone on the committee feels like we need to have another meeting so that we can discuss things that are but that's kind of where we are right now. I know that's a little bit vague, but we're positioning ourselves to be flexible and nimble and give a lot of deference to building principals who need to ultimately make decisions around what food service is going to look like based on decisions that are made by other committees and by guidance that we get from DOE and CDC and the governor's office.
Okay. Questions for Jared?
I answered them all in one fell swoop.
You did a really, really good job. Oh, good.
I actually have a question. Jared, have you talked about how you, in the elementary school especially, how you would get the food from the kitchens to the classrooms? Has that been discussed at all?
A little bit. What we envisioned was some kind of, you're right, like some kind of carts to transport the food. As far as timing and as far as how many classrooms can we accommodate at any one time, I certainly think we'll need a little more input from folks like Karen and Katie and Christine and Vicky on how their daily schedules are going to work, but some kind of system where we can go with. Linda's really leaning towards disposable containers for the food, only because when we're considering that we don't know what the time crunch is going to be like, that would be a method by which we could get the food package, get it to the classrooms, and then take care of it through essentially through the way we normally take care of waste in the schools, rather than spending time, sanitizing trays, those kind of things. So a little bit thought, but we would love input if you have specific ideas or concerns that we are not thinking of.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's come up in our meetings for the facilities at pretty much every school. And I know, the high schools talked about, using the cafeteria and trying to space lunches out differently. but definitely middle school, there's the concern how to get, if they were going to do food to the classrooms in some sort of warming tray, warming cart or something. And of course, there's, all three schools that we've been through, middle school, LER and Riverview, they have a second floor. So up, through the elevator, that sort of thing. So
Good point. I know that the reason at the elementary level we talked about having the kids in the classroom had a lot to do with the fact that, and of course, an early elementary student is different than a late elementary student, but just the idea of trying to coordinate the movement of these students at a particular distance into the class or into the cafeteria. It really, if you can't accommodate them in the cafeteria, it's probably better to bring the food to them than it is to try and have them come down and get the food and then return to their classrooms. I just think with younger students that would be challenging. You don't want them on top of each other. You wouldn't want to put them in a position where they drop their meal and have
Sure.
the fallout from that. So
that's what was talked about down at Riverview. If they were gonna go down to the cafeteria and get their trays and then have to go up the stairs, and the chance of them dumping a tray going up the stairs, that sort of thing. So
like I said,
that was one of the issues we were talking about.
I would absolutely defer to folks who work with elementary students on a daily basis to let me know what they think those students are capable of. And maybe we're overthinking it, but that was our guide.
Yep. Okay. Thanks.
I don't think you're overthinking that one.
I haven't had a clear connection the whole time, but were you talking about going to possibly a daily food pickup that way?
It's a great question. In a hybrid model where we would have some of the students in the building and some of the students out, it is definitely something that we discussed. We talked about the idea that kitchen staff would prepare the meals in the morning. We would feed the kids in the building, and then we would package and make meals available to be picked up by parents for the kids who are home. We talked a lot about how, I know there's pros and cons to that. And it opens the conversation around, well, that's inconvenient for families, and how are we going to get people to come get the food every day? We felt like we need to consider, obviously, the families, but we also have to consider the efficiency of our staff and doing something that's going to both be functional and is going to help build a system. And getting into a routine, and it may not be ideal, but we feel like the time between the spring and the fall, part of what we're asking the community to do, along with all of our staff, is to adjust to a new normal and make plans and make arrangements. So it is a possibility. If we thought about how to do, the problem with trying to do food pickup on only certain days, of course, is now you're looking at bagging cold lunches and making hot lunches for the kids in the building, and that's probably beyond the scope of what we can ask our kitchen staff to do during the course of a week.
Okay. And I know during the spring pickup, there were a number of tables and other resources. I don't know if you mentioned, like, are those tables that are used in the school at the same time, or
Very good point. Yep.
do you need shelves, to hold while you wait for them to be picked up, or?
Right. So that's where, like, Gabe's, heating carts come in, or also, right, those tables were very convenient this spring. Of course, they weren't being used where they normally would be. So that's something to consider, is having access to a place where we can stage the food for parents to come pick it up. Thank you for that.
Karen?
So just another thought to be thinking about as well. So during the months that we were doing the meal distribution, we had at LER a good 6 to 8 ed techs that were coming in, and they were doing the Title I ed techs, special ed techs, district ed techs. Food service is not necessarily going to have access to all of that staff to help bag and then distribute. So just a heads up on that. If you guys can be thinking about that, because that could be a big problem.
Absolutely. And that was one of the things we thought about, was maybe by doing a pickup, potentially folks who are usually doing runs before and after school might be available to help with that. We may be able to use kitchen staff after they've finished preparing the meals. Those are things we're thinking about, but you're right. We're going to have a different kind of crunch as far as help, particularly in a hybrid situation, because those folks are going to be doing daily jobs in the building. And of course, that's assuming that everyone who's on our payroll is available to work. They're going to, if they're in, they're going to be in working with students, and that should be their focus. So it's going to be figuring out who can hand out or help distribute the food during the pickup. Agreed.
And I think the challenge for all of us, but I definitely just thinking specifically about food service, will be if we switch to a hybrid model with little or no notice, is then being able to bounce back and make that happen for our kiddos with little to no notice.
Right. I don't know if there's any direction from, like, I heard the governor say they would be updating the colors like every 2 weeks. But I don't know if that means, on Friday, there's a map that comes out that says, now we're red. And that means Monday, we're not going to be in school, or we go from green to yellow. So now we have the weekend when everybody's not in the building to make a change. It would be nice if, if I put in my vote with the governor, maybe you can give us a heads up like a week out or something like that. But I have a feeling that probably isn't going to transpire. So thank you for that point, Katie. We have more to talk about for sure.
And then with all these extra responsibilities that our hourly employees are going to have, there can be some contract implications as well.
Absolutely.
That we're going to need to consider. On that happy note.
I was going to say it, but I'm glad you did.
Well, have to do it. Have to keep that in the picture somewhere. Transportation.
All right. Actually, transportation would be pretty quick. We didn't meet.
Oh.
So I really wanted to focus because I'm chairing the two committees. So I really felt that I needed to focus on the facilities. And then the transportation will kind of fall in line once we really get a better handle on the facility piece for right now. We've been meeting at each of the schools, so I really want to focus and try to get through all the schools. And so last week we met on Tuesday at the middle school, and John was nice enough to be there with Mike Prey, which is on the committee. And they had already walked through the school. So it was great. They were able to, before we even arrived, to have pinpointed some trouble areas and kind of work through some of the issues that they had found in their school. So it was a great help for that. Something that we've been looking at for the past couple of years is some different way to have the parent drop off in a different location. So that's something that would really need to take place at the middle school, especially if we do have more parents that are dropping off there, because they don't want to have their students taking the bus and being transported that way. It's already, if anybody's been over there for morning drop off, it's already a bottleneck the way it's set up, and it's better than it was when I first started working here. So we've tried to revamp it. So now we're looking at dropping students off that parents would bring in the back of the gym. They would walk down the center kind of corridor area into the back doors of the actual cafeteria. So that's where the parent drop off would be. There would be a check-in desk right there at the door. So that's where the parent section would be. The bus students would still be dropped off in the front of the building. They would come up through the front doors into the building. And it kind of separates those two areas out. So one thing that keeps coming up is screening. If we would have needed to do screening at the school, whether it's temperature screening or what we need to do, kind of the new guidelines are going away from screening in the school and going towards like we trust the parents, they're going to give us the correct information, they're going to do the right thing. So which is a hard kind of pill to swallow sometimes when we're in the buildings and we know that parents will give the kids some Tylenol and send them on the bus or drop them off, and then in a couple hours we notice they come to the nurse and they're sick. So it's tough. So everybody that's on the committee, they really, we've kind of had conflicting thoughts on the screening process, or if there was going to be screening. So that's a little tough. But anyway, we really feel that the parent drop off needs to be separated further apart from the buses anyway, at the middle school especially. So that kind of took care of that aspect of it. They did, we're looking for somewhere in the building, a holding room. I like holding room better than quarantine room. I keep saying quarantine, but it sounds terrible. So a holding room. So at the middle school, we, did find a holding room area with some of the newer, it doesn't have I don't believe it has a window to the outside. So that may be a little bit of an issue. It has ventilation, but there's no exterior window. So if there would need to be something with an exterior window, we may have to revamp where we were thinking of putting it at the middle school. One thing we also talked about is the traffic flow in the building. For most areas, we're able to do, because of the wide hallways, two-way traffic in most of the hallways. Some of the halls or some of the stairs are pretty narrow. So a couple sets of stairs would be just one way. So, one set of stairs going up would be one way, and we have another set that's narrow that would be going down. We're not able to do the same thing going down to the art and music room because it's a very narrow set of stairs. But the way that they thought about it was the teachers would basically escort their students up and down from the cafeteria. So they'd have two holding areas in the cafeteria, one for art, one for music, and those teachers would come up with the students that have class. They would go to the next class, and then they would take the students that were in the holding areas in the cafeteria and bring them down to their rooms. So they're bringing them up and down the stairs, so there shouldn't be anybody else in the stairs going the other direction. So it was great that John and Mike kind of worked out some of these problems before we got there. It helped out greatly for us to make it through the building in a couple of hours and to try to pinpoint each of the troubled areas. Back to screening a little bit. Me and Charles went down to South Portland High School last week and actually looked at a thermal camera device that if we decided to do some sort of thermal screening at the schools, we could set up. We learned a lot about these units, in that we thought maybe if we did this sort of thing, we could just stick it at the door and people would walk through and they could be temperature screened. We found out that it's very susceptible to the cold air outside. So it actually needs to be in a more controlled environment, like a cafeteria, so internal of the building, where there's not big fluctuations in temperature. So that would kind of we'd have to set up almost like a TSA screening area where it's kind of roped off, so students and staff would have to kind of go through a screening process if we decided to do temperature screenings in the building. So really kind of swayed us away from that kind of screening and more towards, let's do maybe if we didn't want to take the parents' word on it or staff's word that they've been fine, but to do some sort of app that I know a lot of companies we talk to, there's a nurse on the committee, Jess, that she said that every day she goes to work, she has to fill out basically with an app and fill out a form saying, if she's had a fever, if she's been sick, if she's traveled, that sort of thing. There again, it's put on the parents to do it, but it's still some information that we would be gaining. And also, I think it really could be used as a attendance. We would know who's coming into the school, who is sick, that sort of thing. So I haven't researched it that far yet, but it's something I will kind of look into if it's some sort of app maybe that we could track. They did say that there's one that would tie into potentially our system at school that works through the school system. So like my software for busing, it ties directly into PowerSchool. So I'd envision some similar system like that. They also did say that potentially it could send notifications directly right through the system also. So I'll do some more research on it and see what I can find on that. We did on Thursday, we did LER in Riverview. There again, we kind of found some additional problems at the middle schools. One, the food, how would we do the food? Just some issues there. Again, the stairwells there are narrow, so it's very hard. There's a set in the front of the building, set in the back. We talked about them being one way, but doing that, it makes the students have to travel a lot further through the building if they are one way. So there again, those students are really, only time they're moving through the school is potentially just in their groups, their class cohorts. So the teacher really, if they're moving them through the building, would have to look upstairs, kind of go around the corner and take a look up and say, okay, nobody's coming, we're all set to go, that sort of thing. And really, they would just be moving up and down the stairs for specials if they needed to. If they weren't going to have to go get their lunch, they would just be moving down for potentially gym and music. I think they've chosen to do art in the classroom, that sort of thing. At least that's what I've heard. So, of course, playground time at the elementary schools that was brought up. Kind of the thinking at LER, it's already kind of broken up into sections that each grade level has kind of a section of the playground that they can use. But at Riverview, they all go out together. So we talked about, we kind of had to divide up maybe some of the playground area outside to kind of help out with keeping the cohort smaller. And instead of those students having contact with all the students in the building. Really, I think we found out that some of this is really just going to be able to be worked through with a change in schedule changes throughout the buildings, and that's something that definitely the building administrators are going to have to help out to see how we can schedule things in time it out. Lockers was brought up, and that was where the timing was spoken about, that we could have a dismissal time would be one class could go to their lockers, go to their rooms and get dressed. The next class goes out in that grade. And we could have multiple grades out at one time. So as long as they're not next to that group's lockers to keep the numbers down. And that way it keeps those groups smaller and there's not contact with the other grades. So just a lot of scheduling, I think it was. The big thing that everybody was very concerned about was sharing of nurses at the different buildings. That definitely a nurse, an additional nurse, is something that everybody felt would need to happen. Which I know this is the committee that would probably have to talk about that. But definitely, Sharon, if I'm wrong here, I believe it's your school in Riverview that shares a nurse, and we all found that to be problematic. And even if a nurse is out sick, how would that position be filled if there was no nurse at a school on one day? And we just talked about if, Helen Thompson's so far away, if there's no nurse there, one of the other nurses now would have to cover, but that's such a long distance for them to travel. And if they had multiple students that needed to be seen at each school, it's something that definitely we thought was something that needed to be brought up for sure. So I think that's it. That's all I have. Any questions?
Nothing like that bombshell right at the end.
Yeah, sorry.
Nice. I have a comment. You might check with a hospital because they do daily screenings for employees, and it's a website, so you could have someone sitting at a computer as kids enter the building, and they go through a series of questions, and then a message gets sent that you're either cleared or you're not cleared.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we do have a nurse on our committee. and she was going to forward me the information of the actual app that she uses. And she actually pulled it up on her phone. And once she completes the survey, it gives her like a little code that has to be scanned at the hospital for her to get in. That's the way, and I think she works up at Maine General, so that's the way it works right there. So she was going to forward that information to me, and as soon as I get it, I can forward it out to the committee too, so we can all take a look at it.
Great. Good. Okay. Any questions or? Yes, Karen.
So we just continue to talk too about inclement weather. So, if we're screening every single child as they walk into the building, I have 255 pre-K to 3-year-old second graders in my building. What happens when it rains? Are they standing out in the rain waiting to get screened to come in? How are we going to do that every day? And then again, when the winter hits. So lots of conversations still happening about that too. Yeah. Pretty concerned about how that screening is going to happen. And again, that report that came out by the American Associates of Pediatricians said most children don't have temperatures. So if you don't have a fever, parent sends them to school because they didn't have a fever, but lo and behold, they had a bellyache, and that's the symptom. So I'm not sure how the fever screening is going to really work at the elementary level.
Yeah, and I really think that's where the push for having a nurse at each of the schools is something that's pretty important. That way, again, like you said, Karen, as far as the screening goes, especially the little kids, the temperature screening is really not consistent anyway, and there's a lot of other symptoms that they have that more than likely will not be found until they arrive at school, and then the nurse will have to be the one that would deal with it. I can't see how we're going to put it on our our administrative assistant that's sitting there trying to do attendance and everything else to be the one that has to be checking these or screening these students. I don't know. I find it hard.
Right, and I don't think the students can be in the office either. So they would we're going to have to really think about where to relocate our nurses, because we don't want children who are ill to come into the office and potentially be contagious and pass it on to a teacher who's in there using the copier, or another child that just came down to do something, bring a message or bring something to the office. So I'm just a little nervous. I mean, our offices are really, really busy without all of this going on. We're going to really have to think about flow of ill children. So I think we're going to really have to look at an additional nurse.
Patsy and then Veronica.
So I was just thinking, like, we're going to have to get really creative with schedules, I think. That lunch recess hour is probably not going to work, and especially for like the amount of time to wash hands and do it properly, and then lines of kids. So I think that somehow we could make it. I mean, maybe you do your lunch recess in early afternoon or in the morning, and you have some time, some learning time between your lunch time and your recess time, just to spread kids out a little more. And I have been thinking about the nurse thing too, and wondering, could the nurse travel to the classroom where the child is sick? Because I do feel those kids have already been exposed to the other kids, and maybe that would eliminate the sick kid traveling throughout the building. So those are just a couple of things I had kind of thought about, but I think you're totally right, Gabe, about the scheduling. We're going to have to get really creative in order for this to work, I think.
I wonder about that, the nurse being mobile piece, only because I think we might start getting maybe some patient, like confidentiality questions that might start getting raised, and when then the nurse has to call the parents, and they can't call the parents from the classroom. And have those sorts of conversations with the rest of the class around. But I like that you're being creative and trying to think through, like, what are some other ways in which we can think about some of our procedures, because that will help all of us start thinking it through, and the people who have to design these schedules really think
right, and someone's going to have to supervise a child that has come to the nurse 6. So she can't go to a classroom while she's trying to supervise another child too, while they're waiting to get picked up. So that's going to be tricky.
So,
okay.
I was reading through the framework that was sent out, and it doesn't specifically say that schools have to do the screening. It is a combination of parents, students, care providers. So if a student's coming from a daycare or home and getting on the bus, are the bus drivers screening, or the parents should be screening? We don't have to take the temperature of every kid that walks in the building, do we? Like, I don't see that anywhere unless I'm missing it. So I think that might be an issue that we're kind of going a little overboard and above and beyond. I don't know. That's my opinion.
Yeah, so it's not in there. It's not written. There's a presumption that families are going to monitor the wellness of their children, and that schools will pay close attention to students relating symptoms or relaying their symptoms to some other adult in the building, and then moving them appropriately. Staff procedures can differ from student procedures. I think one of the questions, probably why this is still a sticking point, is that conversation Pat had with us about being cautious about being negligent, right? What is due diligence? What is important for us to pay attention to? But that was before this framework came out. And so I think you're right to raise that question, Veronica. I think one of my questions that relates to that is, as much as I want a mechanism for communication for families to indicate areas of wellness or not, I do think we probably have some ways to do that already. We just need to repurpose that. And as much as I like the idea of an app, because I think app tends to mean more accessibility for families, I am not confident that we have enough families in our district who will routinely use the app for lots of different reasons, all fairly, quite appropriate. Like they're busy, they're running out of the house at 7 a.m. Their kids aren't out till 8 a.m. There was a time lapse and they didn't know about the kids' symptoms, or they're out at 5:30 or 6 a.m. before the kids. Because there's some concerns about who's seeing that data, and how that's communicated. So if we do use something, we want to be really clear and transparent about who accesses that data and what are our security measures, so that families can feel confident that we can be entrusted with that source of data. And then also how that'll be used. Maybe at 7:30 they input on the app the child's well, and 9 o'clock they're not. We have to be cognizant that people's wellness changes over time, and that we can't hold them accountable to something that they reported as being well at 7:30 in the morning. So I'm not trying to go against this. I'm just trying to be like, let's think about all the sides of this, and try to figure out what is our most efficient and effective means of communicating with each other through a trusted source, and in building trust with one another.
Mary?
So one of the things, as this discussion has happened, I think we need to, or somebody needs to, think about the attendance policy at the high school too. So there was a morning last year, I was in the office like at 7:15, and there was a student there who wasn't well, but it didn't become an excused absence or a waived absence unless she saw the nurse. So she came into school so she could see the nurse to be dismissed and have it waived in terms of our attendance policy. So and thinking about the remote learning or the hybrid plan, that's a piece that some committee needs to tackle as well, and think about the implications of how we're going to manage that piece.
Yeah, so Mary, we actually started that conversation this morning related to attendance. One of the issues is that different grade spans seem to have different procedures and practices. So what you describe as a high school policy is actually a high school procedure embedded in your handbook. It is not a policy.
Okay.
But it's a procedure that has been adopted in order for there to be some kind of regulation across the system and common and shared expectations, which is quite appropriate. The challenge is that doesn't work under these conditions, just like you're raising. And so that's where there's a little bit of a sticking point about universal approaches and how we can better manage that. One of the things I'm hopeful for is that as these handbooks that we're starting to get access to and revise are available to us for staff and student handbooks, specifically under these conditions, can we come to some shared agreements, at least for this year, that we can all adopt district-wide? So it isn't different at the high school than it is at the middle school, than it is at the elementary school. That's going to help Gabe with his facilities planning. That's going to help the nurses with their consistent practices and communication. That's going to help with our families with clarity of understanding, and our administrators, and so on and so forth. And so you're absolutely right. There's some specific practices that we do differently in different settings that we do need to revisit. And we only today really scratched the surface in looking at what are the expectations in terms of attendance, because that was a little murky for us in the spring. And how can we clarify what those are and what qualifies as attendance, and then getting into those like nuances, which I think may have to happen, maybe not in the core instruction committee, but in some of our follow-up, the writers of that, the administrators, and some teacher and association input and that kind of thing. So that we can come to some agreement pretty rapidly around what are our agreed procedures, then can elevate back up to this committee.
Okay.
So are Riverview and LA are the only schools in the district that share a nurse?
They are right now.
So could because I agree, if we have to check kids, and this is obviously a medical pandemic, I think each building should have access to a nurse. Is that something the CARES Fund can use? Like, can you, or we need to find a way, because I just think that's asking for trouble by sharing.
So to technically respond to that, I think it can fall under COVID response staff and student resources. That's the category. There's two. So COVID response student and COVID response staff resources. I think maybe under the student resources. The challenge is understanding what's our best option for moving forward in terms of cost. Is this a position we would want to sustain moving forward after this year? Or is this a 1 year only position? And if it's a 1 year only position, either the resource committee or HR, which is our business department, looking and figuring out what are the avenues for securing a full-time person during an academic year's calendar for a 1 year only position, and then what would the average cost of that be? I think there's agreement on this committee that we need to have a full-time nurse in each building, and then maybe we can ask Karen and her committee to start pursuing that question. But Karen, feel free to use the resources in district or out of district that have some expertise in that, in like contract issues and that kind of thing. So, that might be Andrea, it might be Pat, it may be other resources to better understand what that could look like, and we could bring that back to the table. And then I can double check under the COVID response student supports that could qualify. I think the issue, of course, is always, we have a pot of money and we could easily use it all just for outfitting buses. So, and I just like to use that as an example because it's tangible. So it's just figuring out, where do we prioritize? What I'm hearing is a real strong priority in let's have, this is like the front line, right? Let's have the person that has the expertise in managing and monitoring these systems in every building.
Agreed. Great. John, did you have something, or?
No.
Okay, great. Let's move on to resources. We're at 4:31.
Okay, and I'm going to try to go as quickly as I can. So the resource committee did not meet As we said, we were going to start waiting for some of the other subcommittees to get in there and start doing their work. But in the meantime, on Thursday, we did get from the Maine Department of Education a list of what they are procuring for PPE for our schools. The Maine School Safety Center is the actual committee that's doing this. Before I share the numbers, I just want to kind of give you all an update on how this works. So the committee is getting these PPE going, ordering them. However, our district has to have a facilities manager, and that's Gabe Dostey. So right now, Gabe is our facilities manager. And what will happen is the Maine School Safety Center will communicate to Gabe. He will be the one who will help communicate what our needs are and how we're going to distribute all the PPE. They were going to open up an online portal this week. So Gabe, you should be looking for that. That was that email that we got. We will need to determine the amounts that we have to order and then plan for distribution and storage of all of this, because we need to make sure it's accessible too. So it just can't go in, a garage somewhere or in a storage center somewhere and not be able to access it right when we need it. It will be for the first few months of school. So with that said, here's what we have coming, or what they are working to. These are our numbers for our district that they have gotten for us. So N95 masks, 5,535. Gowns, 5,535 gowns. 17,280 gloves. 2,002 disposable masks. 238 face shields. 4,930 cloth masks. 1,051 clean masks, and I'm not sure what. Oh, excuse me, clear masks. Those are clear, not clean.
They're clean and clear.
They're clean and clear. Highly visible. 335 hand sanitizers cases. 1,110 hand wipes. And 944 mask straps that will go on for the face masks. And that is what's coming so far, or what they're planning for us for our district. They're using PowerSchool, the information that we have for enrollment in our PowerSchool, to get these numbers for both students and staff. So I think with this and with what we've already ordered, I think we're going to be in an okay place as far as PPE to start the school year. Pat was supposed to answer some questions. I'm not sure what questions she had to answer through the Department of Education. They were going to send her some questions to answer, but that's what I have for resource.
So I noticed gloves and gowns were on that list. Are we expected to wear gowns and gloves all day, or is that like just extra in case there's a situation?
So we have certain special ed groups that may need the gowns for helping to change students, or if there's some children who have health risks, behavior risks.
Right.
So it's mostly for them and for our nurses.
Okay. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there because I didn't want parents and teachers who might be watching to freak out like, oh my gosh, I have to wear a gown and gloves if I teach first grade. So, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mary?
So Karen, does that cost of that come out of the CARES Act money, or is that above and beyond the CARES Act money?
Above and beyond. It's a different fund. It doesn't come out of we have, Angela, I can't remember the exact number now, $300,000, something like that.
389,000 and change.
Yep. So this is not part of that fund.
Okay, great.
That's great news, Karen. I really appreciate knowing that. I actually feel a little bit relieved.
Any other questions? So Gabe, when they contact you, if you could again let us know for the resource committee that they've contacted you, so we can figure out how much we're going to actually start ordering and where we're going to put it all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Once I receive the email, I will forward that information along, and we can work together to make sure we get everything inputted in there and ordered correctly.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have a question I should have asked Gabe earlier. Did we ever find out, and I might have missed it last week, but I couldn't find it in the minutes. Did we ever find out from the bus seer if they're doing the bus stuff so we don't have to pay to like have the buses have certain things in them?
Yeah, so I checked with Andrea also, and it looks like it would be something that we would have to pay the cost of. It's not something that's in our leasing contract. So definitely we would have to, we would incur the cost of doing it. And really it looks like at least we would definitely have to look at doing around the driver's seat. And of course we would have to install some sanitizer devices for the students getting on and off the bus right there. So those are definitely some things we would have to do. And when we looked at the cost, those vinyl curtains that they could put in there, just the curtains themselves are around $400, and then it'd probably be I could imagine it'd be more than a couple hundred at the most to install them. So we'd have to put one in each of the buses. With the trip buses, there's 27, so it's not as bad as it could be.
Are those like the ones they have in certain golf carts at certain clubs? It's just like a piece of plastic that is
so it's like a draped piece of plastic. It's a heavier duty. It's not like a cheap shower curtain, but it's a heavy plastic.
Okay.
And I believe they were looking at like a Velcro strip that it would Velcro in.
And that's $400.
Yeah, because it includes it's the side of the driver plus it wraps around the back, so it's where the seat is too. I know.
Well, I was just thinking of what's in the golf cart. It's just one. So, but it's obviously more. So, okay.
Yes, it is more than just the one side. It wraps up and around the back of them also. Yep.
So with 27 buses and about $200 of installation for each, that's $16,200.
I know, but it's not all of the CARES Act.
Better than we first heard.
That's right.
I'm going to double check. So I don't want to misspeak. And now I'm thinking, did I misspeak? So I will double check about the CARES Act. There's nothing in any of the information that I have received that says that districts would have to use their CARES Act money.
They don't, Karen. This is money that it's CARES money that the Department of Education is using their allotment of CARES money to pay for PPE across the state. So it is CARES money, but it's not going to come out of our distribution.
Okay, good to know, because I'm like, wait a minute, I just rereading everything right in front of me, like it doesn't say anything about that. So I don't, but I don't want to misspeak either. So
yeah, I hear you. So Becky, do you mind if we move into the last bit around the practices, because that gets into masks and social distancing? I heard her say sure. Okay. So you'll see at the bottom of the agenda, there's a link. I watched her lips say sure across the screen. It was just like a clear mask. The link in there there's two links. One in there is to the Maine Department of Education's updated framework. So the first question I have is, and you don't have to call yourself out, but know that it was available on Friday. Know that I linked it in there now. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I would encourage you to do so. There's 5 sublinks at the bottom of that main page. I guess generally speaking, I want to focus on physical distancing and masks, but generally speaking, is there anything that this framework, this updated framework, raised for a question that we haven't already talked about today that you want to make sure we address in the near future? Just so we get the question down. Karen?
So I still am confused a little bit. So there's the wording that they talk about that the Maine DOE put out the framework, but it was guidance. It was non-mandatory. It even says that in the priority notice that it's non-mandatory. However, now in what it looks like is that they have the required, even though it was non-mandatory, now there's a piece of it that will be required. Is that right?
It does seem that way, yes.
Because now we've got some big problems.
There's going to be some stuff that's okay. So the red, yellow, and green zones, that's going to be mandated by the state, controlled by the state, and sent to us on a frequent basis as discussed. We have no control over that. And then once we get into certain aspects, like the academic learning programming guidelines, those are really guidelines. There's almost nothing in there, almost, that looks like it's required, because they know there's like, oh, bad phrase, lots of ways to get to an outcome. But there is some language embedded in certain bullet points that say required, and that's the part that makes it a little confusing at the moment. But my understanding is those are the parts we, as much as possible, need to follow. Jared?
Yeah, I was just looking at part one about physical safety, and to your point, it does say under school capacity for implementing the following health and safety requirements. It does say there are some health and safety measures that are required for schools to open safely, and they're going to apply in all risk levels, including green designation. So the colors, I think, are about recommendations about whether you should be remote or in person, but there will be some things that are required as far as health and safety measures, regardless of what you do. If you're in session at all, these things are going to apply.
Yep.
And if we want to remain in session, those things. So I would say that right now we're probably in the light green area, just by looking at what we've got in Kennebec County. And if we would like to remain there, we need to, those are the things that will help us stay there.
The expectations they have on us. Yep.
Right. Correct.
And without jumping right back into this, that self-checks, having a system for self-checks is on that required list.
Yes.
A system for self-checks is, but the exact procedures for how to do that is not.
And so are masks for ages 2 and above. So does that mean all day? I mean, it does say required for the bus. So maybe it's with some, I don't know. I don't know if there's some flexibility in how long they have to wear those masks all day.
So let's go there, since that's part of our conversation. Here we go. So when you look, I linked in the notes I had. Mary, I didn't go through everything of yours yet. I was on vacation and I was running out of time, but I will. I linked in notes I had from our conversation about beliefs and practices, and then we agreed that we were going to revisit physical distancing. But in order to do that, we need to also revisit masks. So under physical distancing, the framework has clarification of the distance between 6 feet and 3 feet. Gabe, this is where you're going to help us out.
Yep.
The notes in our cultural beliefs expectations document state, when Gabe did a review of at least the high school building, if we maintain 6 feet of different distance, we can have approximately 12 desks per typical high school classroom. With 3 feet of distance, we can have an approximately normal configuration, meaning class sizes can remain fairly stable as we typically have them. But we were very concerned about whether or not that was appropriate for guidelines and health and safety measures. So we wanted to revisit that. In the meantime, there's been guidance from the department that states adults maintain 6 feet of distance from others to the extent possible. 3 feet of distance between and among students when combined with other measures outlined in this list of safety requirements, which references masks and hand washing and movement. And then there's a very specific clause, a 6 foot physical distancing while eating breakfast and lunch, as students will be unable to wear masks at that time. So it's unclear if we should set our guidelines specifically on 6 foot differences exactly, or 3 foot differences. It looked like there's still flexibility on that in terms of student seating.
Right. So if I'm kind of reading it correctly or looking at it correctly, if they were sitting 3 feet apart, they still would have to have a mask on. So that means students would have masks. If they were sitting 3 feet apart in a room to have our full capacity, say population back to school, they would have to have masks on all day long
Yes.
if they were in class. Yep.
And if we change to a 6-foot configuration, while seated without movement, we can have masks on. We can take the mask off. Students only. Adults must always maintain masks. And then when a child moves from his or her desk for whatever reason, or is in the community spaces like the hallways, the bathrooms, a mask must be worn no matter the age of our students. We don't have anyone under 2.
Right. Yeah.
With the exception, if a student is deemed medically fragile or cannot have a mask for a certain reason based on an IEP or a 504, and then they will have an exception to that, which is why it's especially important everyone else is wearing a mask.
Yep.
That's accurate, right, Alicia? Okay. She's been schooling me. Molly?
I thought I had understood that to read that they would be allowed to use a shield. Are they not required to use a shield in place of a mask? The population you just discussed.
Good question.
If a student can wear a shield in place of a mask, we'll certainly have them do so. But if a student can't wear anything, we would need to have an accommodation either within their IEP or their 504 plan.
Okay.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
Has there been discussion, because I don't know if it was this committee I'm on or a different one, that we talked about plexiglass on the desk. So if they're at their desk with like plexiglass around them, then they don't have to have the mask, but the teacher has to have the mask. Or was I somewhere else when I heard that?
I have not, that may have been in the auditory version. I have not listened to that. And I thought I had read through this whole thing, but maybe I missed that. Did anyone see that? We can look at that as a follow-up item.
Yeah, I know there is some information about all students being facing the same direction. That's why it works. It works well with desks. They're all facing the front of the class. Patsy just mentioned about tables. And so that's a discussion we've had a little bit more, because out at Helen Thompson, most of the classrooms are all tables. And the worry is if they're sitting across from each other, they're facing each other. So the thought process is they might have to have some sort of divider that would be, a couple feet tall, so it's above the student's head while they're sitting at the table. The issue that we are definitely going to find with that is sourcing the material, getting some sort of see-through divider. I've had Plexi and Lexan on back order for over 2 months right now.
Really?
So definitely it's something I need to start looking at other avenues to try to source the material to see what we can do.
I mean, it kind of, and I know it's an issue of material, but it kind of makes sense that we have some of that available in every class, because there are going to be kids and adults that aren't going to be able to wear a mask all day long. And I think the 3 foot versus the 6, I mean, if you're looking at 3 feet, you're looking at smaller class sizes, which means either more teachers or a very complicated shifting hybrid type schedule. The 3 feet's great, but if a kid has been wearing a mask for 2 hours and is sitting at their desk and is like, I just need a break, then having those plexiglasses you can wipe down as a teacher and kind of share, I mean, maybe that's against the rules. I don't know. It just seems like having that as an option is something to look into.
Molly?
I'll just start off by saying this is really hard. And I know that's a reality that everybody knows, but since last week's meeting, I've been kind of backtracking my confidence in we need to be in school because of how hard all of these things are that we're reading. How much time do the teachers and the kids and the parents have to learn how to go to school this year with all of this. Has there been any talk about a change in start date? And I'm not trying to start the discussion if there hasn't. I just don't know if I've learned that piece yet.
I think someone raised that question to Pat, and upon her return, she'll probably be looking into that question to understand if that's something we need to consider or not. But you're right. There's definitely a need to learn how to return if we do return, and that will be part of our training procedures for staff. That will also be part of what our communications plan under our communications committee. Once that becomes clear, how they can create some materials for families to know what their children are walking into, and then also in our classroom or our learning spaces, how we're going to have common shared expectations. It's going to be the same in every space.
Yeah. In regard to the, sorry to interrupt you. In regard to the 3 to 6 feet that came up in the framework here, who would be responsible for if they had to eat 6 feet apart? You know, then are we moving the desks for lunchtime? Are they splitting the time to the cafeteria? Like, is half the class going? Do you have someone else watching half of them? Or is the 3 feet almost irrelevant at this point because there are so many common times that they have to be 6 feet?
That's a really great question, Molly. And I think that especially tying it back to the conversation about our eating times, where we're saying in the elementary spaces and maybe in other spaces that would be happening in the classrooms. If that's happening in the classrooms and we are currently seated at 3 feet apart, they cannot eat. It breaks the rules. So you either have to remove half the kids at that time to go outside or to some alternate space, and switch your lunchtime recess schedule half your class at a time, or we have to just follow the 6 foot guidelines from the beginning, which is going to result in half the class sizes, which is more than likely 95% likely, after spending all this time on the core instruction committee, going to result in us moving to a hybrid model, even if we're in a green zone, which means part-time in school, part-time not in school, unless we can come up with another way to manage that.
Yes, Gabe.
It's a hard pill to swallow.
And I know at my school we're talking about this too, and we're actually going to use the gym in the cafeteria to have students go down there and eat in those 2 spots 6 feet apart. So then the classrooms are going to be 3 feet, but then we're going to be able to utilize the gym, which they're not going to be able to utilize for PE, and the cafeteria. Is that an option in any building, Gabe? I mean, is that, so then we could maybe do 3 feet in certain classrooms, but they have to eat 6 feet apart?
That's really something we haven't looked at, but I mean, we could utilize those 2 spaces. I just have to mark it out and see how many students we could fit in each area and see how that would work. Of course, we talked about this a little bit at the middle school. If everyone had their 6 foot square on the floor and they could just, eat on their square, we could fit more in there, but trying to have them at tables and spread them apart, it actually is much less efficient that way. So that's one of the hard pieces too, I guess, to make it as efficient as possible. So I'm not sure how they would be doing it at your school. Maybe, I mean, I suppose if they could, have their mat that they sat on, something like that. I'm not sure how it would work, but we could figure out to see what we could fit in each location.
Karen?
So something that I'm just thinking of now, we could so we have a lot of desks and storage because most of my classrooms have went to tables. So we have, I'm sure, at least 60 desks in storage at LAR. So one thing we may want to think about doing is using the gym and then moving the desks 6 feet apart from each other in the big gym area. That would definitely make it so they could eat lunch in there.
Yep.
So,
yeah. That would.
Gym classes would have to be done outside.
Right. Yeah. You're lucky to have desks, at your school.
I think it then comes down to individual building schedules and building in time. I mean, you could even adjust how many lunch sittings you have, but in order to make the most of that space and to bring another group in, you'd have to be able to disinfect to make the most of that gym space. If you could see kids there at 6 feet apart, again, it's all doable. It's just, I think it's going to be very building specific.
Well, and that's something, I mean, Patsy's raising that Pittston Randolph School only has one common space besides their library, but I'm not sure we could fit very many people in the library given where the books are, and that's necessary as well. And I think if we follow a rule, it has to be the same rule across the district. I don't think that we can. I think that's one thing that's going to be a challenge for us to do, is to do that differently, depending on where your zip code is.
The consistency will be very important.
Actually, everyone shares a zip code, depending on where your residency is.
Just one more clarification. So best case scenario or worst case scenario, whatever the scenario, if student desks are 6 feet apart in the classroom, does that eliminate the need for students to wear face masks during the day? Or is it
if they're
regardless
stable,
of the distance?
If they're stable in their seats and 6 feet apart, they can remove their face masks for that period of time. The moment they move from that seat, their face mask must be on. So that is a feature. But if they remain 3 feet apart during the day, their mask stays on all day, based on the interpretations of the state guidelines.
Right.
So that gets us to the mask conversation. So then it gets where you stand here influences the core instruction team, right? If you believe that we want to be able to have some flexibility as to how long our students wear their masks, if that's a core belief of yours, then we have to follow the 6-foot rule. If we follow the 6-foot rule, that's going to influence the core instructions design procedures. We will look at how to do that in person, but when we've looked at that so far, we've found that it's fairly prohibitive in many of our buildings to do a full-on in-person 6 feet apart. It doesn't mean it's not entirely possible yet. We just haven't figured out how to make it work. So it's more than likely we would need to recommend either a full online approach or a hybrid approach. If we believe that it's okay that children wear masks all day long when they're 3 feet apart or closer, less than 6 feet apart, when they're less than 6 feet apart, and we space our classrooms to allow for that 3-foot distance. I think I just lost myself, but you're getting it. Then we will have more flexibility in our instructional models. But either way, we have to prioritize student wellness and staff wellness. So I guess it's seeming to lean towards what is your belief around how long masks can and should be worn based upon the guidelines before us.
Hey, Angela. That's
Yes.
why I mentioned the little chin face shields that go above the nose, because you find them in a lot of restaurants. People wearing them in restaurants because you can breathe with them.
I completely understand that. There's actually some guidelines in this Department of Ed document specifically about the sizing of those face shields. They must extend below the chin and back to the ears. I'm not sure if those follow suit for the guidelines they have for schools, the kinds that you've discussed. I've seen pictures of them.
Yeah, well, when mine comes in the mail, I'll let you see it.
Great. Mary, Patsy, after?
So is this a place that we could differentiate by grade or by age? Because I know it's a challenge for younger kids to wear face masks all day, but at the high school, that might be more reasonable to ask them to do, though it would be difficult. But is this a place we could differentiate by age?
So you can ask that, and we can come up with scenarios that will show what that looks like in the core instruction framework.
Because I'm thinking if we could get as close to 6 feet as possible for younger grades in particular, that we could allow them to take them off when they're not moving, which might be reasonable to do. But if they have to wear them all day, from what I'm hearing from people who have young children, that's going to be a real challenge for our students.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. My one concern about having, let's say, it is easier to keep high school kids 3 feet apart with masks on for a longer period of time. So we say, okay, you can end up having in-person instruction that we can manage. That in and yet we say that at elementary level have to have a hybrid model. Then we have different siblings attending schools in very inconsistent patterns, which may impact families' abilities to care for each other. And again, our responsibility is but the education of each of our children, not about the our primary responsibility isn't, it's a hard thing to say, but it isn't about their kind of daycare approach. But we've all lived through a very traditional school system where we go to school at the same time, give or take an hour. And so there are hardships that exist if we have the high school on one schedule or the 6 through 12 on one schedule and the K through 5 on other schedules, leaving those K through 5 students or pre-K through 5 students potentially at home without 6 through 12 siblings.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about just wearing the face mask piece. Not necessarily having K to 12 kids at home and 6 through 12 kids at school. I was just thinking, just a comment was made earlier about about the equity piece. And so what I was asking is if this is a place we could differentiate, if we can spread in classrooms younger kids out further than we might be able to do at the high school. I guess what I'm thinking is it possible to have part of our plan allow those younger kids not to have to wear face masks all the time and the upper level kids wearing them while they're at school and not having a totally different schedule? That wasn't where I was going.
Okay, I hear you. I think part of the reason I probably jumped there, Mary, is because our class sizes are like 18 to 25 in the elementary levels, right? So that we know that can't fit the 6 foot distancing requirement in almost every classroom based on what I understand the high school class configurations to be as compared to elementary classrooms. So about a third of those students would have to not be present in every classroom for us to, or even a half almost in some classrooms, for us to be able to follow the guidelines of 6 foot distance, which is fine, except I'm not sure we have enough available space for those students to be redirected and staff to be in the building at the same time. I think that's the challenge. Like when you think about pre-K to 2 at LER, their classes are about an average of 19 students, right? About that, all the way through. And the available spaces would be one conference room, which is small for maybe 2 or 3 people, a cafeteria, a gymnasium, a library, and one Title I classroom that we could repurpose if we had to. And so what I think we need is about 12 spaces, and I'm not sure that ends up calculating out to enough spaces. And that's one building, whereas Pittston, I think, has even less available space. Pittston Randolph School has less available unused spaces for the number of students they have, that we could spread them out and maintain a pretty normal schedule. As much as I want to do that, I'm not sure following the 6-foot guidelines to allow for those face coverings to be more flexible, I'm not sure we can physically do it.
And I can't, I have 255 pre-K to second graders, and to have to manage face masks. And I think about how hot it is at the beginning of school. I mean, we're still having 90-degree weather at the beginning of the school year. And, I was just in a meeting the other day and the sweat was just pouring down my face. My school is not air conditioned. And I can't imagine trying to do that for little kids all day long. I just don't think that that is a reasonable expectation. I just don't.
So I guess part of and I recognize the time, so I'd like to kind of cede my time in a minute so Becky can pull us together and conclude the meeting. But I guess I dealing with the tension around this. This is real. This is, we're all trying to figure out what this looks like. And raising this question allows us to understand, which is pulling harder on us, managing the distance or managing the face coverings based on the grades. And what I'm hearing is at that 6 through 12 level, we could, the kids are pretty capable of managing either of those conditions. And, but at the pre-K to 5 level, there's concern about wearing face coverings for 6 hours or so, with the exception of lunch and breakfast.
Is there any way to push or to contact the Department of Education again and talk to them a little bit more about recommendations that are coming from pediatricians and how this is really going to limit whether we can get kids back to school or not?
I don't know. I mean, I plan on being in as many meetings as possible. There's a training coming up this week that I'll be participating in, and many of us will be, where we'll be able to learn more about that, and that may influence next Monday's conversation with this group. I will certainly take what I understand the sentiments to be from this group back into the core instruction committee so that we can better refine our plans that we want to bring forward to you. And it will continue to raise this question, this same question that we're wrestling with responding to in a discreet way. And then maybe we'll have more information, but these are guidelines that are very similar to many other states. So I would be surprised to see them changing.
And I do know that a lot of parents will not send their children back if they have to wear a face mask all day. I mean, we had a pre-K celebration at the end of the year, and some families wouldn't come because they didn't want to have to wear the face masks, and that was for an outside event. So I'm worried about that.
I understand that. And, once we have some learning plans take shape that we feel comfortable enough with sharing with the community, then it's probably in our best interest to then survey families again and saying, now that you know this information, what do you intend to do with your family and children so that we can better plan for our staffing and meeting. So the sooner we can do that, the better. So I guess we'll conclude with that. We're concerned about face coverings all day in the early childhood ages, which then shapes the way we develop our learning plans to allow for that movement. And then we'll again, revisit in the context of a learning plan next week. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. It's been a very, this is the hardest part of the meeting. And Angela and I talked about this earlier. We knew this would be the hardest piece, and I don't know that there's a good solution.
Well, Mary, thanks for taking the minutes. I know, Jared, thank you for taking the minutes. Mary was last week. Jared, thank you. I noticed you even wrote things in bold, so we'd pay attention. That was really helpful.
Job. I was watching. It looks great, Jared. Thank you so much.
Very organized. Thank you all for your continued work on this committee and in the subcommittee and all the other committees that we're doing. There's some great work coming out of this and some real creativity. Thanks for hanging in there on these difficult conversations. This is not an easy task and decision-making process. But hopefully by next week, we'll have some clarity because we'll be able to put it into context and we'll move forward with one decision as best we can.
Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks, Angela.